I'm a big fan of Origins. And Origin. It takes a real man to cut his own balls off. But anyway, I put myself through a bit of a curriculum recently on prehistoric spirituality, and I read Dawn of Belief by D. Bruce Dixon. Doesn't have a cover on it, but oh well. Inside the Neolithic Mind, which is by David Lewis Williams and David Pierce, as you can probably surmise, about the Neolithic. And not explicitly tied to spirituality, however, it has to do with Bronze Age, Proto-Indo-European language, the Eurasian steppe. I think it helps to buff out my understanding of the other two books a little bit. The Horse, the Wheel, and Language by David W. Anthony. A lot of Davids. I'm going to be playing a bit of a time-lapse of one of my painting processes while I speak, because you probably don't want to watch me read off a script the whole time. And if you do, that's really weird. Anyway, these people lived in animistic cultures, where they believed everything possesses a spirit or some kind of unique spark. From the highest mountain down to the tiniest pebble, animism is the root of all religion and what gave way for the gods to emerge as beings to be honored or otherwise contended with. We'll kick off with Dawn of Belief by D. Bruce Dixon, about religion in the Upper Paleolithic. Religion beyond a single individual almost always entails deference to some kind of sage, priest, or shaman. And that's exactly what they had back then. Shaman are spiritual leaders who facilitate confrontations with the spirit world and ecstatic or mystical encounters. They almost certainly led communal rituals and sanctioned the rules pertaining to gender roles, treatment of animals, distribution of resources, and preserving the symbolic canon that their rituals and social lives revolved around. We'll return to the shamans later. These ancient cultures, or clans, seem to have been totemic in nature. Dixon defines totemism as the symbolic association of plants, animals, or objects with individuals or classes of people. It is not so much that clans use totems to worship animals, it's that the totemic animal symbol represents the clan, not worshipping the symbol of the clan as much as worshipping the clan itself. According to Emile Durkheim, what is true at the root of totemism is true of more complex religions as well, that all religion is essentially the worship of society in some form, the value-laden entity that transcends the individual and should be conformed to. Not that he sees this as a deception, he actually views belief, ritual, and worship as essential societal functions, and I do agree on some level. To be clear, these are inferences and deductions. These findings are based on disconnected patterns and through lines and modern hunter-gatherer tribes like the modern Australian Aborigines or Kun. But these deductions don't strike me as far-fetched. We have also uncovered evidence of rites of passage, which mark the transition from one place in society to another, such as the transition from childhood to adulthood, singlehood to marriagehood, and from life to death. There are also rites of passage into more esoteric realms, such as initiation into the priestly classes or shamanism, later expanded upon in the mystery schools of ancient Greece. But for the average member of society, adulthood, marriage, and death are the three big ones, and each in 3 stages. To enter into adulthood, you must be initiated into it. To enter into marriage, you must be engaged. To die, you must be dying. I believe we lack proper rites of passage into adulthood today, which is why we see so many Disney adults or young people who hate the government but enlist anyways. We only have a precious few sites that indicate such rituals into adulthood, such as Touk de Dodobert and Grotte del Adara. But rites of passage are so common across cultures until recently that it's hardly a stretch to assume that they were a staple of prehistoric cultures. Judging by the clustered footprints found in some of these caves, it seems that children initiated at around 15 years of age and gathered together in large groups to perform joint dances or rituals. Konki, in 1981, posits that the subjects of rock art among the Kun were not selected because they were hunted or good to eat, but that they had qualities beyond the natural human state, and hence were good to think. The Paleolithic cave paintings we encounter could very reasonably follow this line as well, seeing as they depict all sorts of animals in various forms not explicitly tied to hunting magic, assuming that was ever even a thing. Mobiliary devices are portable, such as weapons, implements, necklaces, and idols. Carved bone silhouettes and discs have been found from the Upper Paleolithic between the Dordogne and Pyrenees that represent many horses and some other animals. Which is interesting because horses were not domesticated until somewhere between 4000 and 3500 BCE, meaning that they were depicting wild horses, not domesticated animals they lived alongside. As shown by the varied depths and angles of the cuts, the markings in these devices were not made all at once, but rather added over time, likely as a way of indicating or demarcating the season to keep track of time or the cycles of the region, or as an artistic form of documentation. For example, devices found in southwestern Europe had images of salmon ready to spawn, serpents mating, or plants budding, all indicating spring themes, or bellowing or fighting stags, indicating fall season rutting behavior. Taking these patterns and their interpretations into account, it seems that religion back then was grounded in a canon that everyone was encouraged to experience for themselves and contribute to. Time was perceived as cyclical. Human sexuality, especially female, was used to illustrate grand analogies or principles about humankind and the universe. Model of social and material reality was embodied and reflected in the parietal art caves of Franco-Cantabria. D. Bruce Dixon ends the book by saying, "To the classical Greeks, fear and hope were the twin tyrants of humankind. No less than ourselves, the peoples of Ice Age Europe were tormented by these twin tyrants. Their reply to this torment is frozen in the mighty art of the Upper Paleolithic and has resonated down 300 centuries into our own time." Now we come to Inside the Neolithic Mind, which of course takes place right after the Paleolithic. People in the Neolithic believed in a tiered cosmos that was represented in every part of daily life. The supernatural and the mundane could not be separated. An upper world, a surface world, and an underworld. The underworld almost universally represents death and decay. In Mesoamerica, a tree at the center of all things, much like Yggdrasil, connected the upper and underworlds, and constructed their cities and temples to represent this tiered cosmos. Even in Europe and Asia, at sites like Göbekli Tepe or Kayonu, their cult buildings reflect this idea of a tiered cosmos. In a similar vein to the animal symbolism on Paleolithic tools and weapons, the Neolithic architecture of places like Çatalhöyük was designed with very specific visual motifs that reflected the cosmic and social order of things, priming the minds of people who moved down into the constructed underworld to have altered states of consciousness, or ecstatic experiences. The crux of many rituals throughout history and traditions has been dying to oneself, a form of humility and surrender to the powers beyond. Whether it be Buddhist monks dissolving their ego, the Eastern Orthodox notion of dying to the world, or Kun ritual specialists simulating death and entering into altered states of consciousness. Death is not seen as an end, but a transition. The walls of Çatalhöyük in Turkey are covered in depictions of hunts, vultures picking flesh, hands, and symbols commonly perceived in near-death and psychedelic experiences. The way structures like Çatalhöyük and Ain Ghazal in Jordan are built seem to reflect a tiered cosmos, where the very structures Neolithic people inhabited reflected reality as they perceived it, including underworlds. Many bones were found under the house floors, and ritual structures in lower levels had higher amounts of red pigment than the upper levels. Descending into these structures seems to symbolize descending into the underworld itself, as if the physical and symbolic are one and the same. From Paleolithic caves to the Newgrange tomb, even if not a direct downward descent, there is still an element of advancing into the dark, a journey into the underworld, which is what I would argue the majority of our ancient and treasured myths revolve around. Shamanism, even into the modern day, contends with this element of simulating death, even if it is not in a bodily sense. Death was ever imminent and always will be. It seems ancient people were more cognizant of that on a cultural level. Now we return to the shaman. Anthropologist Stephen Hugh Jones and his wife Christine from Cambridge University identified two types of shamanism: horizontal and vertical. Horizontal shamanism is very much experiential and grounded on this plane, concerned more with hunting, fishing, war, and contacting animal spirits. This seems to be largely what Upper Paleolithic shamanism was based on. Into the Neolithic, we perceive the characteristics of vertical shamanism, or that which is more concerned with the transcendent and esoteric, the pursuit of knowledge, and perhaps a bit more politically involved, during a time where temples, monuments, and civilizations were beginning to advance. While parables and fables generally illustrate moral principles, myths are a bit more complicated. They have building blocks to them like script in a language, as myths kinda are a culture's language that tells their story. Just look at Judaism and the Sons of Abraham, or the American Revolution and the stories that sprung up around that, not because they literally happened exactly that way, but because they say something about the culture. Some of these mythical building blocks we can observe are religious binaries or polarities that constantly pop up, such as light, dark, man, woman, life, death, left, right, culture, nature, Kendrick Lamar, and Drake. Bear with me a minute, it'll make sense. When these binaries are identified, they can even be viewed vertically. So let's say death, which opposes life, is on the same side as another above or below it. Let's say eagle, which opposes snake. When the elements of one side are vertically identified, let's say eagle and death, then you can recognize the rich symbolic language throughout a myth, such as in Skaldskaparmal and Prose Edda, where the giant Thiazi, being an eagle, always represents death, meaning that when Loki strikes Thiazi and is taken into the sky and coerced into a deal, it is because he arrogantly opposed the eagle, death, and is now literally at the mercy of death itself. When we learn to interpret myths and identify their building blocks and parallels, the cave paintings and art carved into the tools and weapons of our prehistoric ancestors become just a bit more comprehensible. We will likely never divine their full or true meanings, but we can make some decent inferences. Even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, at the dawn of civilization and the end of the Neolithic, we see the religious binary of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, where Gilgamesh is semi-divine and represents culture and civilization, and Enkidu is raised by animals and represents nature and wilderness. Throughout the epic, Enkidu becomes increasingly tamed, starts wearing clothes, gets laid, herds sheep, and fights the predators he once called friend. When he meets Gilgamesh, a fight ensues that shakes the structures of civilization. Perhaps this represents man's journey from a hunter-gathering way of life to pastoralism and eventually to urban life. As Enkidu lays dying, he realizes that society has taken his claws and teeth from him, so to speak. And when he descends into the underworld, Gilgamesh laments. Also, fun additional fact, I just finished reading the book Behave by Robert Sapolsky, where he observed that societies with the lowest rates of war were not simply hunter-gatherers, but specifically nomadic hunter-gatherers. As a bit of a further side tangent, this reminds me of the range wars in the 1890s and early 1900s America, when Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot bought out millions of acres of forest as national forest reserves, or merely proclaimed them to be so, and enforced grazing under lease, which resulted in private firms operating cheaply with no incentive to maintain the land after they had used it up, leading to range wars between stockmen trying to secure good land where they could, and ruin in it amid sabotage and slaughter between competitors. Before, there was incentive to maintain and preserve the land so that they could return to it later. Pastoralism, according to Sapolsky, seems to coincide with honor killings and territorialism. Not like we can go back to the good old days at this point unless every last person opts for van life, Vardos, or living out of horse-drawn carriages, but I think it's a fact we should account for. Now we come to The Horse, the Wheel, and Language by David W. Anthony. From the Neolithic and into the Bronze Age on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, also called the Eurasian steppe, there seems to have formed a fundamental mythology from which many others branch out, including Greek, Hindu, and Norse. At the beginning of time were Manu and Yimo, man and twin, and their great cow companion, traveling through the cosmos. They decided to create the sun, moon, elements, the world, and all of its inhabitants through a sacrifice in which Manu, man, seems to be the only one who comes out unsacrificed in every version of the myth, and is in fact the first priest that brought ritual sacrifice to humans so that they could help maintain cosmic order. I hope you can appreciate just how much I'm simplifying all of this. Anyway, then came Trito, the first warrior who brought sacrifices and returned the stolen cattle from the dragon or serpent. This root myth of Trito can be observed in Indic, Roman, Norse, Iranian, Hittite, and Greek myths, the basis for Western civilization. Hell, Yimo is probably the root of Iemus, the archaic Italian word for twin that evolved into Remus, like Romulus and Remus. Yimo, the sacrificed one, even looks like Norse Ymir, who was sacrificed to form the cosmos as we know it. Manu persisted into Old Indic and Germanic Manus. Here we can see how these ancient Paleolithic and Neolithic spiritual systems culminated, at least in Eurasia and the West, and then exploded out into a vast kaleidoscope of thousands of different myths and spiritual traditions with shared roots. Our shared roots. Sacrifices seem to have been a political trend, that with the conception of gods that can be accountable for worldly phenomena, and a personal relationship with them came about cosmic maintenance, or a sacrifice to sustain order or perpetuate a cycle. Human sacrifice is born of fear, desperation, and greed. Hence, only a chosen few were allowed access to sites like Newgrange or Noth, where they likely descended into the underworld and communed with the gods or spirits, leaving the masses to take their word for it because, as people who dreamt, they understood the power of visions. Surely if some people have more powerful visions than mine, there must be some sort of spiritual hierarchy, right? But what other ladder were people with ambition supposed to climb if they were too weak for war but savvy enough for social maneuvering? People's spirituality is ripe for the picking, because it is subjective. Not to say spirituality is a weakness in and of itself, I think it's a fine thing to explore, but one must be conscious and mindful of what they allow to affect them. Let us keep in mind that these groups were not all one homogeneous culture sharing the same beliefs. There are general similarities between them that we can discern. However, much of the rich lore and complexities of these many tribes and civilizations has been forever lost to time. The best we got are shared materials and symbols. So, what can we learn? What might be worth reintegrating into our lives, even in some small way? Young men in particular seem to be lacking proper rites of passage these days, and thus remain as children. It's not hard to find grown men who still view themselves as children, and perhaps some of that whimsy should be retained. But a child can neither effectively raise a child nor properly protect his kin. I think these ancient forms of thinking also demonstrate the importance of tiers, hierarchies, how there's always a bigger fish and that no human or institution is above nature, that we are just a small part of this grand cosmos. We are here to flow with the course of reality, not to impose our ideas of how things should be. Awareness of our symbols and how we allow them to influence our lives is also important. You are what you eat, so to speak. You are what you honor and give attention to. Totemic cultures understand their totem and channel it, aspire to it. Some Christians wear a crucifix and channel it. Others wear it as a fashion accessory. Some people think The Big Lebowski is just a funny movie. The real ones understand that the dude abides. Alright, that's all I got for today. Be sure to smash that dislike button, and leave your cruelest comment down below. Farewell.